Hi. So we're just setting up right now. Please be patient. Hey everyone. I'm waiting for my friend Jorge to get online. Oh, we have a guest. We have a guest. We have a guest. This is Mal, everybody. I'm just trying to kill some time before Jorge gets online. Um, so can you guys hear me? Oh, Jorge's here. Cool. Hey, okay, so we're connected with Jorge.
Hello,
Hey, Jorge, what's up?
what's going on?
Nothing much. Okay,
Wait,
cool.
well, let me see. Let me get in frame. It's
So,
strange.
so Mal was like the opening act right now.
Oh, cool. Hi, Mao.
Fun fact, we both have cats named Mal.
Yeah, just different spellings.
Different spelling, yeah. Mine is short for Mauricio. Yours is for just.
Mao Zedong. Because she
Oh,
rules the house with an iron fist.
yeah. Um, so I'm just gonna wait for a couple more people to join. It's barely 6 right now, so folks are just getting in.
Yeah.
So right now I'm in Washington D.C. and it's like 58 degrees. It's kind of cold. But something really interesting that I haven't gone out in a couple of days, and you have to wear masks to the store. It's like you're not allowed to go into the store.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so I don't know. Is it like that in Salvador? Is everyone just wearing masks?
Everybody's wearing masks, but like they're all of a different kind. And there's almost like a hierarchy of the masks, right? There's like some masks that like have that little the N95s, I think they're called, that
Uh-huh.
have the actual filter there. Then there's the surgical masks that have the blue layer and the white layer. And then there's like people who have made masks at home. That's just like a sheet, you know? It's like a little
Yeah.
sheet of, it's like a sock or something that they've made into a mask.
I mean, that's how folks are doing out here too, because not everyone has masks. They're using t-shirts.
Yeah, t-shirts. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Can
100%
can I
cotton
ask
t-shirts.
you, just for visuals, because like on my screen, your head is getting cut off by people joining. So if you can get like your chin a little higher, or a little bit
Mm,
less, or a little bit less of the roof,
okay, let me see.
like I don't know, sit on a phone booth, sit on a phone book. You don't gotta
Is
get
that better?
closer. Yeah, it's a little better.
Okay.
Um, all right. We got 41 people. We got 41 people. Let's wait a couple of minutes, see if we
Hmm.
get 50. We might not get 50, but 40 is great. Thank you everyone for joining so far. Thank you everyone for joining so far. Let's just see. Okay. That's I see some friends on here. So I see Wilfredo. Okay. Hola cipotes, cipotas, cipotex. Cool, cool, cool.
Oh, hi, Christina.
Oh, Christina is here. My cat is still like he's right next to the stand right here.
Mau, 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 mau.
Okay. All right.
Okay, let me get a pillow to sit on. Hold on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Get a pillow to
One
sit on.
second.
Get a pillow to sit. Hey, Paula. Oh, this is an Ottawa. Can we have Canada in the room? Do we have anyone else? Do we have anyone? What we got? We got the U.S. in here. I know. We got Canada, Toronto. Hey, Dallas.
Is that a bit better? Yeah.
Okay. So I love that you guys are putting questions in. Like
Hmm.
feel free to put questions in, and we'll try to get to those at like towards the end. Um. All right. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce myself first, and then I'll introduce you, and then you can say something about yourself. I'm Norfolk, Canada, cool. New York City, Panama, Italy. Okay, wow. We're
Wow,
international.
Austin.
So you guys might know me. This is because it's my Instagram, but I am a journalist right now. I work with AJ Plus, which is part of the Al Jazeera News Network, and I cover mostly like America immigration, but now it's all hands on deck for
Hmm.
COVID-19, and that's kind of what brought us here today too, because I've been talking a lot about COVID and the impact of El Salvador, but I'm not actually there. A lot of people have been accusing me, hey, oh, Joanna's here. A lot of people have been accusing me of being super biased, that I'm not in the country, I don't live there, and that's fair. Um, that's fair. You're actually in El Salvador, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And but you don't live there all the time.
No, no, I live in New Hampshire,
Okay.
totally the opposite of El Salvador.
But your parents live there, right? But your parents live there, right?
Yes, my parents are here, and so I
Okay.
constantly visit. And also, my research is based here, and so
Okay.
I maintain my connection to the country.
Okay. So me and Jorge go way back, like 10 years. We went to undergrad together, and we actually went to El Salvador a couple times. We went once when I was 19, you were like 20, 21, and on a delegation for an election. And then we went just one time before I moved abroad, and I stayed with your folks in Suchitoto.
Yeah, 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 that's right.
Um, so we go way back, but Jorge actually is one of my best friends, and he got his PhD from Yale University last year. And he's currently an assistant professor for Latinx Caribbean Studies, um, that area,
Hmm.
um, at Dartmouth College. Can you tell us a little bit about like your work and like what you focus on? And yeah.
So sure. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Jorge Cuellar. I was born in El Salvador. I grew up in Los Angeles. Went to UC Santa Barbara with Daniel, where I studied Latin American studies, film and media studies, and sociology. And now I'm an assistant professor um, in Latin American, Latino, and Caribbean studies at Dartmouth College. And my work is focused specifically on Central America. I look specifically at El Salvador, and I look at projects after the Salvadoran Civil War that are persisting and enduring the decrepit and decaying conditions of poverty, of climate change, of a gutted health and education system, and how folks are, despite these kinds of challenges, still attempting to carve dignified lives in El Salvador. And so, one of the things that I've been looking at for a long time is the maneuverings of the state, right, ever since '92 to the present, and that's
What
why
happened
I've
at you
been.
too?
In '92 was the end of the Salvadoran Civil War. It was the formal de-escalation of the violent conflict that ended the skirmish and made the then guerrilla army into a formal political party to enter into democratic elections ever since. And for 20 years after the Salvadoran Civil War, um, the right wing party Arena that was also forged in the late 1990s, coming out of right wing movements, death squads, military cultures, became the other kind of political party that fought for presidential elections, the legislative assembly, all the way down to municipalities ever since. And there, that kind of bipolarity, political bipolarity in El Salvador, has always been of interest to me because a lot of the legacies of the Civil War still endure in that political in those political contests, no? And so it's been ever since '92 to about 2000. I think it was 2009, right? Um, uh, the the country has been governed by Arena, which stands for the National Republican Alliance, um, and
They're
they've been
literally
in power.
nationalists, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So they've been in power for 20 years, and it's only in 2009 where we have political alternancy to the FMLN. They get to experiment in the executive for 10 years, and then until the last election where we have the figure of Nayib Bukele emerge from the shadows, and
As he puts it,
supposedly break. Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. He
yeah,
said he's the first president of the post-war. How do you feel about
right.
that?
So I mean I think that that's again a lot of what Nayib is doing is good public relations, And I think that something like a post-war, whatever he calls it, is um, is just smoke and mirrors in order to present himself as a different kind of candidate that's not like mired in all the legacies of corruption, in the Civil War antagonisms that still endure. You know,
Mhm.
so he's presenting himself as a different kind of third option, but as we've come to see over the 9 months of his presidency, is that he's a kind of just another kind of right winger in populist guise. So it's just like the same thing in new clothing, you know?
Okay. Um, so we're gonna get into Naive a little bit later. And I know folks, that's kind of a big reason why a lot of folks are here too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of folks that love Naive that are probably listening too. We know he's popular.
Oh,
And
he's
so
so
what you're
popular, man.
so what you're saying, might be upsetting. But first, I want to just kind of like set the scene because you've been there since the beginning of the national quarantine, and it just kind of happened to you. You just happened to be in the country, and you're kind of stuck there right now, right?
Yeah, so let me like narrate how I like why I am where I am.
Yeah. Like, can
and
you tell folks what you were doing before the quarantine?
Yeah. So I had like I had decided to come and do some research in El Salvador to fill out my book manuscript project and also get started on some new stuff. And I was here like trying to gather interviews and get into the archives and the libraries. And like I get here February 28th or 27th, I can't remember, but February 28th, I'm here. And I'm trying to set things up. Things are rolling. I actually do get some things done, but then, as this kind of coronavirus panic starts to catch steam, and Bukele declares the quarantine on, I believe it's March 10th, March 9th, actually, he does it, and then 10th is like it goes into effect. Um, I'm like, everything gets shut down. All non-essential state institutions are closed indefinitely until further notice. And so, like, all the stuff that I had planned to do were totally thrown out the window, right? Because
Yeah.
like nobody's trying to get out of their house. Nobody's trying to talk to me. Like, so it just really ruins my research method, which is also like moving around the city and just feeling the city and how it's changed and all of that, right? So it really ruined all my research
When
plans.
you're talking about the city, you mean San Salvador?
Yeah, I do mean San Salvador, but also other places like in Sonsonate, like Izalco. I also was going to Sultan as well in Oriente. And so there, like I couldn't, I
Yeah,
couldn't
you could.
risk
Yeah.
I couldn't risk going out to these places and visiting with folks, and then Bukele declaring, nobody can leave from Sultan all of a sudden. It's a cordon sanitario or a cordon sanitaire in French, that like a sanitation cordon where people can't leave el departamento anymore, and then I'm stuck there. It's like so it's really messed up the rhythm of my work, and so I've kind of had to recalibrate a bit, and instead of moving forward with those research projects, I've had to like just kind of start thinking about what Bukele is doing with this quarantine
Hmm.
and the coronavirus, how El Salvador is responding, and so that's why I've been writing all these kinds of weird little articles that I never imagined doing
Yeah.
about that, about that, and also because nobody's really writing analysis of the president that way, at least for the diasporic audience, the English-speaking audience,
Hmm.
who's connected to El Salvador, but doesn't have kind of an entry point to really begin to think about Bukele, the quarantine, how
Uh-huh.
their relatives might be affected, right? All these kinds of things.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it. So I was in El Salvador right before you were. I was there for a personal matter, and
That's right.
um, and it actually threw my plans in because I was supposed to be back in El Salvador because they're digging up my uncle from like 1980. He died during the war,
Hmm.
and that's been halted. And like a lot of plans have been halted, and so I was there. There, you probably experienced the same thing. Like they were taking my temperature, and I was like, this is like, this is they're taking my temperature. I was like, this seems extreme. This seems extreme. And the U.S. wasn't even doing these things, and the U.S. obviously kind of failed, and so Nayib kind of juxtaposed himself
Hmm.
with like the response of the first world nations. And a lot of people made an interesting point. Like they were saying like, well, El Salvador has to do whatever it can to stop the virus,
Hmm.
or to not let the virus penetrate the countrywide,
Yeah.
because El Salvador doesn't have the infrastructure, and so people thought that, like, stopping the virus by any means necessary, whether it meant like forced quarantines, whether it meant like curfews, et cetera, was necessary.
Yeah.
Um, and then he got a lot of international attention because he said that he's gonna like turn off like bills, like utility bills, and he was gonna give like a canasta básica, or he's gonna give like $300 for
Yeah.
who need the money, and he made a point to include people in the informal sector, which is like a lot of
Hmm.
street, like a huge part of the economy. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Hmm.
My battery like interrupted, and so whoa. Okay, technical difficulties over here. So a lot of people in the world heard about El Salvador for the first time, kind of
Hmm.
as this like amazing guy who was like saving this country from COVID-19, and that was the narrative. And then no one's really followed up
Hmm.
since that media moment. Like, shit has kind of hit the fan, but like El Salvador is also not unique in things hitting the fan. Shit has hit the fan in the U.S. Shit has hit the fan in Europe. What do you think about that response? You think it was like, you think he has some leeway in some of the things that are going wrong, some of the
Hmm.
things going wrong, and what are the things going wrong? Like, what's your
Yeah.
assessment? You've been there and you've seen it.
Yeah, there's so my thinking about this is that Bukele's like that because he was first to kind of put in these preventative measures in March 10th. Um, it comes in the wake of that February 9th event where he occupied the assembly, where he like kind of was the show of power of militarizing um, uh, the halls of the Salvadoran governance, which was a strange moment that really kind of messed up his image abroad, where he was this seen as this character who was going to be the saving grace of El Salvador, who was going to clean it up, who was going to make it investable, who was going to kind of turn the corner, right, after these failed governance experiences of the last 30 years. And when he did that, there was so much the diaspora, the international community was really activated and looked at this issue as like, wow, this guy, he's really kind of, he's pushing it a bit. He's doing something that we haven't seen in a long time, right? Getting the military into the places where law is being made and pressuring legislators to do things his way, right? And so we got to see another side of Bukele that people had not yet really been able to see because of the way his kind of media machine was operating abroad. And then now, right now, fast forward a month later to March 10th, we have Bukele trying to recuperate that lost political capital, right? Because he did that a month before, and so his like preventative measures, March 10th, and all of this, and him being picked up by news media all over the world as like a shining example of how we're supposed to deal with the coronavirus is also part of shoring up his image, right? His image that was destroyed in some ways by that February 9th event where he took over the assembly. Now, what I would say from people here on the ground, they actually see Bukele as that shining example. His popularity here is immense. I mean, like immense. Like the guy can do no wrong, right? He's guided by God. He's doing everything that he can within the means and the resources of the country. But all of these kinds of emergency measures that he's putting into effect are actually just covering up these long-term issues that that political parties and traditional elites here have been complicit in creating. So we have Bukele saying, this emergency measure of creating a new hospital, for example, or offering people better quarantine conditions, or what have you. All these things come as a response of public outcry due to their initial inhumanity. Because it's all being improvised, it's all being created. It's a very touch and go with this guy. And so what I'm seeing is that despite these things, people are saying no, but Bukele is doing what he can. Bukele, he like, just imagine if an FMLN president was in power right now, like what would that response have looked like, or what would an Arena president have done in this situation? Like, so there's all these kinds of what ifs that people will use to think about Bukele in order to justify his doing a good deed, right? And so what this does is that it makes impossible a kind of critique or a real assessment of the character and of the policy choices that he's making in this emergency moment.
But don't you think it's a lot of people will say that, exactly kind of what you said, but like in a different, we'll turn it around and be like, well, Nayib Bukele inherited the systemic failures, right?
Right.
He, not just he inherited the last 10 years. A lot of people will blame the president on the last 10 years of Arena, but we also have the last 20 years, or the last 10 years of FMLN. But prior to that, we had 20 years of Arena, which were like 20 crucial post-war years where we like created, where the country was sort of like kind of like formed as this new democracy, right? What do you have to say to that? That like these aren't naive didn't create these problems, right?
Yeah, no, I think there's some truth to that. There's a lot of truth to, there's like morsels of truth to everything, that all positions in many cases. And that's true that the some of the issues that he inherited aren't his doing, but they are his responsibility, right? And even though like he like, as a candidate for the mayorship of San Salvador, he ran under the banner of the FMLN. So he's linked to some of those systemic issues that took place in the last 10 years. He's been a businessman in El Salvador alongside his father. And so alongside his father, who's been part of ANEP, which is a kind of organization for entrepreneurs and businessmen. So he's been complicit and part of the situation that he's inheriting, even though it seems, just because he just entered, the executive, they're not really his responsibility or his doing, but they actually are, right? They actually are. And one thing that we also should mention is that even though there were 20 years of Arena that really gutted the country in so many ways, that created conditions for doing politics in El Salvador, that the FMLN was forced to play a certain kind of game, a certain kind of neoliberal game in El Salvador, because the rules had been laid out over the 20 years prior, that also made the FMLN make some really kind of suspect moves, right? That co-created the situation that the country's currently in. And so like the blame is everywhere. The blame is everywhere. And it's not Nayib's only, but what we do see is that that there's still no, even though there's rhetoric of being a third option or being something new, there's no real indication that at the level of policymaking and at the level of really putting money where his mouth is there any like political will, right? Okay. So we're seeing some of the continuation of the poor policies of prior administrations, just in kind of new, in a new kind of wrapper, if you will.
It's like, if you ever watch The Simpsons, it's like when they put a new hat on Malibu Stacy and they just like market her. That's how I've been thinking about Bukele. That might become dated. I don't think kids watch it. But that's, I know you know that reference. So there was this like recent media moment where this woman was, and I posted this, and I actually got a lot of shit for sharing it in the way that I did. There was this woman who had she had stayed like since 2 a.m. waiting. She borrowed $5 to go to the social welfare office and get her $300, and she didn't get her $300, and she was like, I don't have money for food. I don't even have beans at home. And it was like gut wrenching. It was hard to watch. And a lot of people felt that, maybe it was exaggerated, maybe it was propaganda. But it definitely made a ding in like Nayib's sort of like perfect plan. And but was from what you saw, was it really like that? Were people like out in the streets? Were people like, indignados? I had people coming to my inbox and being like, "Well, those people were paid protesters by the FMLN."
Yeah. Yeah. So that day, that Sunday, was really strange actually. I also woke up really late that day, so I didn't see some of the early stuff until later. And a lot of people woke up like really early that day to head to those Senade offices where they were distributing the subsidy, like super early, trying to get ahead of the queue in order to get their subsidy because they needed it. A lot of people had already spent 2 weeks in quarantine and like hadn't been paid or hadn't been able to go out and sell their stuff to make enough money to buy food or what have you. And it was just such an intense situation where the overwhelming need of the country didn't match the logistics of the way that they were trying to distribute this subsidy. It seemed to me that like they really hadn't thought it all the way through. Like they didn't realize that they had just asked people to stay in quarantine for 2 weeks, to not like do any commerce or sell their stuff on the streets. And then the day that they tell them you can come over to this office to pick up your $300 subsidy, like they're like, oh wow, we didn't think that everybody would show up. It's like, so there was this really crazy like disjuncture from what they thought that they were doing versus how they were supposed to deliver it. That didn't really match up. And so I did see that day, because I had to go to the market. Was There was a long queue. There was a huge line of people. Like it went like around blocks. It looked like maybe like easy 100 to 150 people.
But these people are supposed to be social distancing.
Exactly, right. So there's 150 people who are like in line. A lot of them were women. A lot of them were women of all ages and old folks who are the ones who one, aren't able to work any longer, and two, are the heads of household in terms of providing food, right? They're the ones who cook, who clean, who provide all of that. And this is the kind of makeup of these lines. And it was hot, people, like, it was just really, really like a poor, it was a really bad look, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And then once word got out that these people were, waiting in line for a long time, that they were gathering beyond like allowable limits or whatever, Bukele said, we're closing these offices. And then he backtracked and said, we didn't even tell you to go to these offices today. We didn't even tell you to go to Senade to pick up the subsidy. We said that, go to the website and make sure that you're eligible for this subsidy.
So go to the website. I thought that was very interesting too, because like, one, it assumes that everyone in El Salvador has internet access, and if they do, most people do have internet access, but it's like, if you don't have money, it's prepaid, right? So if you don't have money to go pay the saldo to put on your cell phone to get minutes and data, then you're not going to be able to get it.
Yeah, and so about the eligibility, and the eligibility became another crazy thing too, because it was really random, right? So what they were using as the registry of people who were eligible for the subsidy was the people who received an electricity subsidy prior. So like there's certain people, low income folks who receive a monthly subsidy to pay for electricity. And it was those people who were supposedly the ones eligible, but then it turned out that the website was malfunctioning, that the registry was incomplete, and so then a lot of people who thought they were eligible because they live poverty every day, right? Weren't. Sorry, my doorbell's ringing. I don't know who it is. I'm not gonna go check.
Tell them to go social distance.
Yeah, no, I'm not receiving any visitors today, but. And so basically, yes, the registry didn't match the actual need of people in the country. And so that's why a lot of people turned up that were not on any registry. They were just really confused. They're like, wait, hey, I'm poor. I'm a street vendor. I make X amount of money per month. I think I should be eligible. And so they went to the office and tried to check in with the office. That then they never got to ask because it closed down very early, right? And so then Bukele's response to this was like, hey, why don't you guys go actually follow instructions, and like I've been saying, and go to the website that at that moment actually was malfunctioning and not working. And then he had to like launch a new website and this whole thing, right? and so yeah, it was just really poorly kind of executed, right? And then we had also these kinds of como infiltrado narrative that people like, other parties had paid people to go out and line up, and like, there's always this kind of
You
like
hear that from every side
suspicion.
too. Every side
Yeah,
will tell you that the other side brought people to pay things. It's almost like people in El Salvador don't have a free will. They just like you just pay them to do what you want.
yeah. And then,
Um,
one second, sorry, Daniel. And then another thing, just to wrap up the subsidy thing. Then there was this other narrative of like some people from certain families that were affiliated with Nayib's party got the subsidy, right? They got the subsidy, and other people didn't. And so there was all these kinds of like political kind of mudslinging that was happening too around the subsidy issue, right? That showed like really kind of random eligibility criteria for for people who needed the subsidy, and so this is what also created the crowds and the gatherings and the overflow of people on the streets that day, right? Sorry. Yeah.
yeah, so yeah,
Well, that's a good
it's a
question.
complicated issue. And another thing that was very alarming, actually, kind of like before the subsidies were announced and before the media moment, I started getting lots of DMs from people in the diaspora,
Hmm.
videos in these initial quarantine camps.
Yeah.
And these
Yeah.
these quarantine camps were like very controversial, because there was no advance warning. People like were in the air, they arrived, and then they had to go into quarantine or go back and
Hmm.
pay a ticket to go back. And um, that was sort of a rollout that was sort of like didn't pick up as much steam, but it was criticized. But like people were like, well, we have to do whatever we can, and even if that means quarantining people against their will, essentially. And I've been seeing a lot of things by people in the social movements, people that I've been connected to through CSPES, the
Hmm.
community solidarity to people of El Salvador.
Hmm.
Shout out. And that they're accusing Bukele of using this moment to kind of trample on civil liberties.
Hmm.
And this is this is probably the first time since the war that there's like national like curfews, right? The kids coming up today don't remember the curfews, from back then. And
Yeah.
so for a lot of people, this doesn't really connect to them, with the war and the fight for like human rights in Salvador. Um, it feels like a completely different issue to a lot of folks. But what have you seen in regards to like human rights and the way these quarantines are being kind of managed, or like
Hmm.
the way people are being brought into them?
Yeah, so what I saw initially was that people, like, again, like you said, who were in the air, like they were placed into quarantine, mandatory quarantine, not even knowing what was going on, right? Because the decree came out, or like was put into effect when people were still in the air. Also, even some people who had arrived to the country just a couple of days before the actual decree came down, they went to round them up essentially and bring them into quarantine. So it wasn't just the people in the air. There were people who are already like settled in, kind of, who were brought in depending on the arrival date of your flight. So there was that, and the quarantine conditions were like improvised. They basically like they used an airplane hangar and they put a bunch of bunk beds in it, right? That were like about 2 or 3 feet apart from one another. And this is supposed to be the quarantine, right? With people who were coming in from all sorts of different countries, Italy, Spain, China, everywhere, right? Making connecting flights throughout Central America and landing in El Salvador, which is also a kind of hub. Everybody, like a lot of people have to do a kind of layover in El Salvador too. And so like there's a lot of traffic. And then a lot of these people were just mixed up in the quarantines, and so this is why we're seeing some of the numbers, right? A lot of people that have confirmed cases of coronavirus are coming from the quarantines, and so this initial phase, right, where everything was like kind of improvised. People from human rights organizations like like Cristosal, PDDH, all these people called it out. They called it out. A lot of citizen journalists, not citizen journalists, but citizen videos, circulated through WhatsApp, circulated to Twitter, and all of this, calling attention to these really poor conditions where people were getting cold food if they got food, or like a snack to hold over for lunch, right? The latrines or the restrooms were really, really unhygienic and dirty, right? So there was all this kind of stuff going on at the beginning. And then after it was called out, and basically Bukele was sort of shamed in public about this, is when we have him saying, oh, we're going to open up these hotels, we're going to retrofit these other kinds of spaces that we could make into better quarantines for people. And then the main quarantine that had these poor conditions called in Jiquilisco, was shut down, right? But it was only after human rights defenders and observers and monitors called attention to the decrepit conditions.
We're talking about human rights, which is like kind of a big deal with El Salvador. Someone just asked, what would you do? What would y'all do to make this better? And it's just kind of like, it almost like, it's sort of like kind of like this like narrative that sort of just is like okay with fascism in Salvador. Like historically, it's just like, well, like these people don't know any better, so you have to kind of like strong arm them into quarantine.
Yeah. No, that's a big one. That's a big one. Like I've been hearing from people like, el salvadoreño no entiende si no le doblan la muñeca, si no le dan duro. Like, because there's a kind of sense that Salvadoran culture is stubborn, right? It's stubborn. It's anti-authority, right? It's reckless. It's what they call valeverguista, right? And it's this attitude that then also allows for, or even requested in some instances, that the police, that the military be harder on the Salvadorans so they understand, right? So they understand that they need to stay in quarantine and they need to get strong-armed to do it. So there's this weird kind of like already kind of pre-existing tendency to be like, yeah, what Bukele is doing is appropriate because otherwise the Salvadoran won't understand, And then I think that is also very troubling because of what has happened in the history of the country, how human rights have been, violated for so long, right? But people don't think about those issues from the point of view of the violation of human rights. They think about it like, oh yeah, now this guy right here in my community is going to pay attention, So it's a very delicate thing, but given the history of the country, like these excesses that the police and the military are being granted, gives them so much discretionary power.
Can you
right?
explain that? Because that's something that I'm not like super familiar with.
Yeah.
In terms of COVID, I know that Nayib Bukele, since he got into power, has been very pro-military, pro-police, and the justification of it has always been, well, how else are we going to deal with the Mara problem?
Yeah.
Right? And sorry, my like little stand is like, I have a gimbal and it's just moving.
Whoa.
So people are kind of have been justifying his sort of investment in security, right? Because of the Mara situation. But now we complicate it with COVID-19, and we're kind of having kind of like it's kind of interesting because like the U.S. doesn't want to talk. Trump doesn't address, when he addresses the nation on COVID-19. There's no scientists. There's no nothing. Yeah. There's no CDC there. El Salvador is kind of doing the same thing. Not too differently, except El Salvador also has like this like kind of militaristic sort of angle often with how they're going to deal with the problems. And what do you feel about Nayib Bukele? Do you feel like he's using this moment to militarize? Do you think those claims are exaggerated? And given our history, should we be more vigilant about this?
Wow. I mean, I think that given like what happened in February and what his long-term goal has been to make El Salvador investable again, and using security to do so, right? We need to be more vigilant. We definitely need to pay attention to the pieces that are being moved during the pandemic, and also how he's not really taking into consideration many groups from civil society, activists, human rights organizations, public health experts, mental health experts, right, into the conversation as to how to deal with the pandemic. So it falls in line into what he's been doing, that it's military and security that's going to be the saving kind of method, right? That's going to save us from whatever crisis, whether it be a medical and public health crisis right now, or the insecurity and gang crisis that's right there too, right? And so I think that's what I've been trying to do: call attention to the fact that he has like an insular group of people that are very handpicked, that are actually the ones who are consulting with him and telling him and guiding him and offering him their analysis as to how to deal with the pandemic, right? And what we're seeing based on everything that has happened in the last 2 months is that it's been more military, more police on the streets, more people being picked up arbitrarily and taken into these centros de contención, aka quarantines, and it's there that we're seeing that it's the military and the police option that is the one that's taking priority over any other way of addressing the health crisis right now, and also the insecurity crisis.
Yeah, it's a mess. What have you heard of like how they're treating the homeless population? Obviously, they can't quarantine, and this is an issue for every country. What I've been hearing is that people are just getting snatched up at night, whether they're homeless or whether they're breaking curfew. Is that true? Is that just exaggeration?
I mean, I think some of that there might be some exaggeration to it, but people have been picked up arbitrarily. Like there's some people who like went to the grocery store and they forgot their grocery list in order to prove that they're going to the grocery store, and they got picked up and got taken away.
Wait, you have to have a grocery list?
So like there's different ways,
like, because some people are like
okay,
not
let me backpedal on that one. So because there's so much discretionary power being given to police and military to determine whether or not your reason to be outdoors is legitimate, people have devised ways to prove it to the police and to the military. So they like, for example, certain municipalities have given out these sheets of paper. Let me see if I have mine around here. No, I don't know where it is, but the sheets of paper that have your name, your address, your ID number, they ask everything but your blood type, and you have to show this to an officer in order to prove that you're the designated person to do the errands for your household. So you have to have that. You also have to have, like, if you're going to the grocery store, a grocery list, right, in order to prove to police and to whatever officer that you're doing what you're doing, so that you're not considered to be, just loafing around, but then again, some people like forget it, or some people don't have somebody to help them out in formulating that list or filling it out because of literacy levels. That people get caught that way too. They just get picked up that way. Some people also don't have the, let's say, the personality to deal with authority, and so they're not able to really express themselves in the face of somebody holding a rifle what they're doing, and so those folks are also being taken away. So there's
you think because, like, not everyone's always on the same page. Information doesn't flow like sort of evenly given different levels of access, and what does get shared is often a lot of alarmist WhatsApp posts, perhaps fake news. Do you think it's very possible that someone could be walking around, not really know the rules, and just end up in quarantine jail?
I think initially, like at the beginning of the state of exception, I think a lot of people got picked up very quickly for not really being informed. Some people don't like read, Twitter every day, aren't on WhatsApp all the time, don't even turn on the TV or the radio. They just live, in el campo, in the fields, and they'll come down to, the local town to do some shopping every now and again. And I imagine that some of those folks got caught into this unknowingly, not being informed, But again, there was like a huge misunderstanding or misrecognition by by the government to take those folks into consideration. That like there are other ways. Like not everybody is a internet connected Salvadoran a millennial. Not everybody is that.
Yeah, and that's been an issue before COVID because my tia is in her 70s and my she lives in San Salvador and she's in the city, so she's a bit more connected. Um, and then I have a tío in La Union who's around 70 as well, and La Union is a little bit more out there, and
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't have a cell phone on principle. He just doesn't want one. He makes me call his landline, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's been kind of an issue with my folks is that they don't really know what's going on with the government because they don't have Twitter, they don't have Instagram, they don't have
Yeah.
Facebook. So they're just like, I don't know what's going on because like by the time things get to the TV, it's just like it's been very filtered, or there's been a couple like squabbles online that they'll never hear about.
Yeah, no, I think, and then because this thing is like being kind of created as it's unfolding, as it's evolving, like some of the measures change. Like the measures change from like one day to the other, and so like what people thought was okay a week ago is not okay any longer. And so and that's also catching a lot of people off guard. And the way that information travels here is word of mouth, right? Someone is connected, and then somebody hears it, but then some of that detail that really matters isn't transmitted, and then so folks get a different version of what the president actually decreed, and so they think that, okay, oh, I can do this, but they forgot to mention that you need to carry that paper from the municipality. So there's all these levels of filtering that are happening of those presidential orders that are not really, they're not getting to people in the way that I think the president imagines they are.
Mm-hmm. So we got 15 more minutes left of the live, and so I wanted to start getting to folks' questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a request earlier to kind of do it bilingually. I would love to. If folks have suggestions, I ideally wanted this to be for the diaspora
Mm-hmm.
who may not be
we
consuming a lot of this stuff in Spanish.
we can do one in Spanish too.
We could do another one in Spanish. I think they would have to be just maybe separate, like
Yeah.
two equal ones. But just because logistically, I don't know how that would go. I feel like we'd lose people in between. But if not, if you guys want, if you guys want a Spanish one later, like let's talk about it. So someone, Guanaca Hermosa, lovely name, asked, are conditions different or the same in San Salvador versus the small cities or versus other departments?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think generally speaking, the way that I've been trying to understand this is by the number of people that are being picked up and taken into quarantine from different departments. And what we're seeing is that the people who are in like Cuscatlan or Santa Ana, that are like sort of closer to San Salvador in Occidente, are the ones who are more so being taken to quarantines, which makes me think that there's more police presence, more military, more checkpoints, more kind of that stuff. I know less about what's going on in Oriente, but what I'm also seeing is that they're how to answer this, that in Oriente, or in places like, let's say, Usulután or Tecoluca, all these other places in Oriente, there are other there's still checkpoints, there's still military and police, and they are getting picked up, but not by the same numbers. And that makes me think that people are either live more rurally, right? And so they're away and have different ways of negotiating the quarantine based on the way their communities are organized, versus in Occidente, where there seems to be the majority of the Salvadoran population, and they live in closer proximity to one another too. And so I guess that's the only way that I've been sort of able to kind of gather how that's really taking place.
Okay. We got some trolls in the comments.
Okay. What are the trolls saying?
There's just something about, I don't even want to read them.
Like we're Bukele bashing or something.
They're just like very baity questions that are like off topic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are your thoughts on Bukele's stance on Israel? Like, that's not the topic today. So someone had a really good one. what is it? Jay Eats Plants. Said, is there any word on like what like grassroots efforts are doing to sort of get through the crisis, ameliorate the situation? Is there mutual aid happening? Are the
Mhm.
social movements mobilizing? Um, have you seen any of that? Are you aware of any of
So,
that?
so what I'm seeing is that there is a kind of organic critique amongst feminists and queer groups who have been calling attention to Bukele's, sort of persona in politics. So that's something that has been central to people really rethinking what the quarantine means, right? And also how domestic violence is, upticked to the nth degree, given that El Salvador is also a very masculinist and machista kind of environment. And so all these things are there's support there, right? And they've been organizing and mobilizing mental health and support services specifically for women and phone numbers that they can call in case they have a situation in the household. Uh, Human rights groups as well that accompany different Salvadoran towns and then have long-term connections with places like in Chalatenango, for example, that have been central to helping people receive the basic foodstuffs, for example, that the $300 that the government was supposed to be giving hasn't yet come, and so they're like, "Yo, we need to help these people and provide some food." And so there are these kinds of grassroots efforts, but they're not on the scale that I would imagine them being. And there's a few reasons as to why I think that is, but but what I'm seeing is that they're very local efforts that are not being given the kind of airtime that we would expect.
Same,
Like
same.
for example, I'll speak for myself. Like I've been purchasing extra foodstuffs and also extra sanitary items and distributing them amongst my community. Like that's been one thing that I've been doing. But there are local efforts
Okay.
that are not that are really based on the individual who resides in that community, right? And because folks are there's it's strange. We often think about El Salvador as being this kind of cohesive, collective community where the community loves one another and they're friends and they all get along.
Who
And
said
and
that?
and no, I think there's kind of something about that, but that's really not the case. And so a lot of these like uh, pleitos inside the community are also coming to the fore, and they're also creating conditions where people don't really want to help one another. They're like, oh, they'll figure it out. They can take care of themselves. When what's needed is the opposite. And I think that that's partly to do with some the ways that these communities have been organized, the way that crime has affected these places as well, where people aren't really practicing the mutual aid that one would think would be organic to some of these spots.
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's and I kind of want to speak to that a little bit too, because people have been asking me who they can get in touch with, and there's not like this like one big relief fund that's going to all Salvadorans equally,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So, I've just been plugged in and just sharing resources as they come on my
Hmm.
feed. Like, I noticed that there's one account. It's a soccer nonprofit called
Hmm.
AFJA.es. AFJA.es has been supporting and sharing links to different mutual aid things that you could contribute to, like GoFundMe's. But they are hyper localized. It's for this village here, this village there.
Yeah.
There's also another one I think called Today in El Salvador, who for wherever they live in El Salvador, their local community, they've been accepting donations and going to send packets of frijolitos to people.
Hmm.
Um,
There's also ARPAS.
Arpas, yeah.
ARPAS is another one. There's also El Movimiento Social Comunitario. You can also follow them on Twitter. They're also folks who are distributing things, so you could hook up with them. And but again, some of these things are also based on folks' kind of familial networks. So if you can just get in touch with your family, down here, and connect with them and ask them what they see as a need, both for their family or for neighbors. That's another way to approach the problem.
Also, I just pinned a comment that you can donate to
Oh yeah.
ASPIDH Equidistrans.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I just pinned it so folks can have that information. Yeah,
Like,
I think that's kind of been my move as well, is just sort of like, calling my mom and asking what folks need.
yeah, check
Yeah,
in on your viejitos. Check in on your viejitos.
yeah, exactly, because the state has always been the state in El Salvador, right? And so, folks have always had to come in. I remember there's been so many crises. Like, I want to say the last big crisis was the war, but that's not true. I remember 2001, like my mom had to borrow money to buy a bunch of tents and then ship them to El Salvador because homes are falling.
Hmm.
So I've heard incredible stories out here in Washington D.C. of folks going back to a lot of folks here are from La Unión in Tipuca. Shout
Hmm.
out to the Tipuca folks. That during that earthquake, folks just got in a, folks just drove supplies and drove even building supplies to like rebuild homes. Obviously now we're in a tricky situation. We can't physically go to El Salvador, right?
Hmm.
So the mutual aid in the form of like Western unions and stuff like that is probably going to be like
Limited. Yeah.
one of our last lifelines. Let's ask for one more question. Let's look for one more question. Let's see. I'm having trouble navigating this. Oh no, that's my door.
Yeah, and also connect up with C-Space, connect up with
Yes.
all these organizations. I mean, that's another thing that I've been thinking about recently is how, like, Bukele's Nuevas Ideas project has kind of filtered into the diaspora, like, and I think C-Space has been a place where there's been an organic critique of some of his moves. Um, so this is important too.
I got one. It's a little bit more of a macro question. What do you think of Bukele's performance in regards to the crisis compared to other Central American countries?
Ooh, that's a
Um,
good one.
you know, for
Like
me,
what? Yeah,
well,
go ahead, go ahead. Yeah.
for me, it's just like it's hard to measure COVID because I'm covering it on the global scale. Like I've been looking at Italy, China, the U.S. kind of daily for a while,
Hmm.
and one way to measure it is like the cases, right? Um, but it's also not the best metric, because a lot of these things are, especially in countries that are like, colonized countries and like where white people just can come in and out how they want. Um, and even there's even been cases of people sheltering in these like tropical countries because
Hmm. Hmm.
they get away and then spreading the disease. Um, I think I think it's something we can't measure yet. And we can't just measure it with cases and death toll like that. That is a metric, but it's also just going to be like how people economically like survive this moment too. Like who's going to have food to eat, who's going to suffer job loss, and we're not going to know, I think, all of those metrics until this is all over. But like you're kind of an expert in the region, not just Central America,
Uh-huh.
but like Caribbean, Latin America. Um, what kind of other responses, other models have you been seeing?
So, like, I think the it's really hard to measure, like you said, the impacts of these kind of improvised policies that are taking place throughout the region. But what I can say clearly is that the lingering effects of the measures that have been taken in El Salvador are going to be felt for years to come, right? Because there's businesses that are mom and pops that are dying. They're not going to come back after the quarantine. Like there's all these things that are gonna take place that is gonna skyrocket unemployment. That's gonna leave people in certain kinds of different states of mental health after the quarantine, right? That are also going to be issues moving forward, right? That's what I'm seeing here in terms of the way Nayib has been responding and the lingering effects of it. What we see in places like Panama and Costa Rica is a more let's say a healthier healthcare system that has not been gutted in the same ways that it has in El Salvador and Honduras, for example, right? Totally, bare bones kinds of, healthcare here. And that's already struggled to meet the needs of people, non-pandemic needs, right? Even before the pandemic. And so like what we're seeing is that those countries have been able to not only test people more for coronavirus, but they've also been able to attend to people's needs as well, right? So even though we're seeing these crazy numbers in Panama and in Costa Rica, that's actually partly due to the fact that they've been more efficient in doing mass testing. They've been more efficient in retesting people as well, and not only going for those folks who are in like critical condition or showing symptoms or what have you.
Hey, so sorry about that. I didn't know it times out after an hour. It just shut. So we're gonna do 10 more minutes because Jorge still wants to do 10 more minutes. So
Okay. So for those of you, thank you for joining us. Thank you for still being here. Welcome back, Jorge.
Oh yeah,
Sorry
hey,
about
sorry
that.
about that.
This is my
I don't.
first live. I didn't know there was like a hard hour where they cut you off.
It's crazy.
But seeing so many of you back that's great.
Yeah, so I don't know what I was basically saying that there's a different kind of health system in these countries that haven't been affected by the same kinds of privatization schemes that has allowed those health systems to better respond, whereas others have had to, by virtue of having a poor healthcare system, resort to these like heavy-handed militarized measures to prevent folks from getting sick. Thus, in order to prevent the healthcare system from being quickly impacted, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing in terms of the differences.
Yeah. There's this one question, I think by Margaret, that I kind of wanted to, just mention a bit about. You mentioned it earlier as sort of people have this sort of like faith in God with Bukele.
Oh yeah.
And that's something that I've seen in my reporting as well, is that he definitely plays like a savior kind of messiah figure for folks. And he, when he was mayor of San Salvador, he used to always every Christmas make an address and be like, well, my grandmother's from Belen being where
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ is from, and always drawing this like sort of like link to
Mm-hmm.
his heritage, but also like he doesn't advocate for Palestine ever. He believes that like Palestine doesn't need land. Palestine needs business, is what he said in an interview. But that's kind of getting off topic. Do you have anything to say about like sort of religion and Naib's kind of saviorism?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a really apt question. Yeah, evangelism, Naib's evangelism has been central to the way he's articulated himself as a politician. From, like you said, his position as the mayor of San Salvador, and it's something that he, like someone in the comments said, he milks it routinely, right? He did it when he occupied the Legislative Assembly, and he continues to do it now, right? In the shadow of the image of Monsignor Romero, oftentimes, no, from the halls of the Salón de Honor in Casa Presidencial. So yes, he's been constantly doing and sort of articulating his kind of saviorism as someone who is going to guide El Salvador to a better place. And he's been doing it by appealing uh, evangelicals in El Salvador and also Catholics, because Jesus is everyone's. um, and he's been getting a lot of traction that way. Like just recently, I saw him retweet Toby Jr., who is the head of one of the biggest evangelical churches in El Salvador, called El Tabernáculo Bíblico Bautista, which is he has a lot of sway, right? He has a lot of sway. He speaks to people. He has one of the biggest congregations in the country, and Bukele retweeted him, right? Given that Toby was going to use one of his churches as another quarantine. So this is coming. They're still doing this, but you can see that there's very strong links between the kind of evangelical community here and Bukele, and the way he positions himself as a politician. That's going to really kind of guide us through the apocalypse.
Mhm. Thanks for that. I guess the last thing I want you kind of briefly touched upon it, and we've talked about this offline. You know, I'm seeing this in the U.S. as well, that there is a, and Salvy's Be Like just kind of mentioned that, that's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay.
You know, there's been an uptick in domestic violence calls in the U.S.
Yeah.
From what I've heard. Countries like Spain, you know, they have this method where if you're being abused at home, you ask for like a certain mask number,
Mm-hmm.
and then that lets the getting technical issues, and that lets the authorities know, or lets the pharmacist know,
Mm-hmm.
or get you in contact with some help. Um, what's it? And you've talked about this on Twitter a little bit as well. Like, what is the role of like gender and gender-based violence, you know, in a country that has a lot of femicides, and you know, what can you gauge, or what have you been seeing around this
Mm-hmm.
topic?
Yeah, I've seen. Well, I mean, I take all my knowledge of this from Salvadoran feminist collectives here that have been saying that since Bukele's entry to power, there has been an uptick in domestic violence. There has been a more kind of concerted, or almost a kind of disregard for that kind of violence as being legitimate kind of violence, and what we're seeing in quarantine, based on what other people are saying, is that domestic violence has gone up, and it's largely rooted into these kind of dysfunctional domestic situations where men have often exerted so much power that actually being outside for many women and going to the store and going to, you know, the mill or going to buy tortillas has been a way to kind of lessen the pressure on some of these tense home situations. And so there have been, I think, I would imagine, an increase in domestic violence in El Salvador, and it's largely rooted in the way that in another link in the home, right? Articulating a lot of worry, men dismiss that, and that becomes a site of tension and likely violence against women for being alarmist in the home, right? And so there's these tensions as well that I think predate the pandemic situation that that are kind of bubbling up, but we're not yet seeing. I'm not yet seeing them. I'm not running those, you know, those lines right now where folks are calling in to kind of
Yeah.
make the claim that they're being abused at home.
Salvy's Be Like just mentioned Ciudad Mujer would have been so critical right now. For folks who don't know what
Oh yeah.
Ciudad Mujer was, a project started by the FMLN government in 2010 or 2009, whenever they started. And it was basically like centers for women, not just for like protection and resources
Yep.
to combat violence, but also just like, you know, job training and resource sharing, to sort of uplift women, you know, to sort of fix the gender inequality problem. That was an FMLN project from 10 years ago. I think the dream was to have them in all the departamentos evenly, but I think, you know, there was issues with like the Asamblea, but like Ciudad Mujer was completely dismantled, completely defunded by Nayib Bukele.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a social program for women that he like destroyed. And you know,
Yeah.
would have been critical right now. That's all the time we have. We've been 10 minutes. Someone asked if I'm going to have these up. Yes, they're going to be in my stories. And if I can attach them to highlights, they can live longer than a day, then I'll do that. I'll do that as well. I guess because there's 2 lives, there's going to be 2 now.
Mm-hmm.
One is an hour. This one's going to be 10 minutes. But yeah, thank you, Jorge.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Jorge.
the invitation. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. I hope you eventually, quarantine's lifted and you can eventually come back.
Let me say something real quick about that. Like I
Yeah.
actually can leave in Salvador.
Okay, you can.
So I can leave, and it's a lot of the flights that are going out of San Salvador Airport, Monsignor Romero Airport, are deportee flights that then the return legs are being used to evacuate U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents back to the United States. So I actually technically can leave, but it's very right because the situation in the United
Yeah.
States is such that there's very little control. There's and so it's a risky move for me to go right now, and so
Yeah.
I'd rather wait it out.
Yeah, good call. And like that's super creepy. Yeah, ICE is also I know there was a bunch of gringos that were trapped in Honduras, and then like ICE rescued them and brought them to the
Yeah,
States. I'm like, anyways, yeah, there's so much to agonize about this moment, and with our diaspora, but um hopefully we'll do more of these, hopefully with other people. Thank you again, Jorge. Stay safe out there in Salvador. Have some pupusas to go for
yep.
me,
All right.
pupusas de arroz, and say hi to your family for me. Um, and yeah, I hope you all got something out of this, especially diaspora folks. Learned a thing or two, but that's it for me. And thank you all for joining and for joining, especially the second live.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Salud.
Salud.